would now like to invite to the stage our next conversationist, Elaine Quijano, an anchor for CBS, and she will introduce our next featured conversationist.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano, correspondent with CBS News and anchor for CBSN, our 24/7 digital platform, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here today with award-winning journalist Maria Ressa. She is the CEO. Yes, you see that she is a one-woman media army here. She is the CEO of the news site Rappler, Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 2018. She has been a journalist in Asia for more than 30 years as CNN's bureau chief in Manila, then Jakarta, and later CNN's lead investigative reporter focusing on terrorism in Southeast Asia. Maria Ressa, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start off with a little bit of background for people who may not be familiar with your story. Your news site, Rappler, began reporting on the Philippine government's drug war under President Rodrigo Duterte that has resulted in the deaths of thousands of Filipinos.
Tens of thousands, according to human rights activists.
And so after Rappler's reporting contradicted some of the official government numbers, you and your team became the targets of critics on social media. And in fact, that was the focus of a CBSN Originals documentary called Fake News, Real Consequences. Let's take a quick look at some of that.
To give people the power to build community, to bring the world closer together.
Make people doubt what the facts are, and your trust is eroded. Social media was weaponized.
The government has done a pretty good job of sowing some seeds of doubt into the minds of people.
If nothing changes, we will lose democracies. This move towards authoritarian-style leaders. I can see the same thing happening in the United States.
So, Maria, before we talk about social media and the weaponization of social media, I want to start with a foundational question, because there may be perceptions in the audience or people watching around the world, perhaps misperceptions about what it is that journalists actually do. So can you explain to us, what is the role of a journalist in a democracy?
I think this is the reason why we became journalists in the first place, right? Information is power. Journalists, the mission has always been, as the fourth estate in a democracy, to hold power to account. To hold power to account for abuses of power, the ability to take away some of our rights, and the levels of corruption, which, you know, some journalists around the world now have given up their lives in this mission. And I would say that more than ever, the mission of journalism is critical today.
So you ask difficult questions, oftentimes, of people in positions of power. On whose behalf?
The people. And, you know, no one wants to be the person that says the emperor has no clothes when everyone ducks. But ultimately, that's what we do, right?
So let's talk about some of what we saw in the clip from the documentary. One thing that we didn't see there was that in addition to this targeting on social media, there were some very direct threats against your life, against the lives of members of your team. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So I think part of the reason this time is different, why we have to look at the world differently, is precisely because the traditional role of journalists is gone. The largest distributor of news now is technology, right? It's social media platforms, and they have dropped the gatekeeping role we used to have. We kept the public sphere free of lies. We determined what the facts were, and we were held accountable if we gave the wrong information. Today, lies laced with anger and hate spread faster than facts. That is your news distribution system. And in our case, what it's done in the Philippines is this kind of astroturfing, you know, fake grass, the astroturfing of lies, bottom up on social media. The Philippines, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet. And this kind of lies that came up first attacked me and the company I created 7.5 years ago, Rappler. It said we were foreign influenced, foreign controlled, very Putin-esque in attack, lies. And then a year later, power, the most powerful man in our country is our president, Rodrigo Duterte. In his State of the Nation address, not a press conference, he then said that Rappler is owned by Americans. Not true. I immediately tweeted, Mr. President, this isn't true. But that unleashed first online attacks that threatened to kill, to murder, to behead. There was a group of people that came to our office and asked President's supporters to come and behead us, line us up in a firing squad. The threats can be creative, you know, but they still go down to that. And I think the hardest part in that is, when does inciting to hate, when does that lead to real world violence? And I have 100 people in Rappler, and I'm very protective of our young reporters, right? And then to have the president mimic those same attacks, it sandwiches us. This is where independent media is today, but we continue doing our jobs.
So let me ask you to make a distinction here. When we talk about media, the lines can sometimes be blurred in some people's minds when you talk about traditional news media versus what we think of as social media. Can you give us a breakdown of, for instance, how it is your journalists at Rappler go about their work in disseminating information? Are there standards that you put into place, that you check your facts, and how does that differ with what might be appearing and disseminated on social media?
I'll go back, and Mark Zuckerberg said that Facebook is about free speech, right? But what's actually happening on the platform is free speech is stifling free speech. If I wanted to target you and prevent you from doing a story, I would attack you. And I would do it exponentially. So after we did our very first propaganda war series in 2016, we were the first globally to really look at how the algorithms of social media platforms impacted democracy. When we did that, I was attacked by an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And it lasted. And then beyond that, it's also a new form of psychological warfare against reporters. Women, that was when we began to look at, how many accounts do the fake accounts? So we looked at 26 fake accounts and manually counted, oh my God, these 26 fake accounts can influence up to 3 million others, right? So fake accounts, here are real people, unsuspecting. They're influenced. When you say a lie 1 million times, it becomes a fact, and then they're forever changed. I watched the gap in our society grow. The fracture lines in our society were pounded open, and that was the gap between the rich and the poor, was the first one. But I think beyond that, our biggest problem now is you not only have to stop the lies, you also have to rehabilitate the people who begin to believe the lies, right? So, and Yuri Andropov, the former KGB chairman who headed the former Soviet Union, he actually said a quote that's apt for the Philippines right now. He said, disinformation is like taking drugs. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, then you become a changed person. So you have to stop the input of the drugs, and then you have to rehabilitate. That is the state of democracies around the world. And if you look at Oxford University, the Computational Propaganda Research Project said there are at least 70 democracies around the world now where cheap armies on social media are rolling back democracy. I mean, that's a long thing to say. Did I answer your question?
Well, so the question becomes, for people in the audience here and watching globally, who's responsible, and how does one push back against what seems to be a pervasive, some might characterize as insidious source of misinformation?
Absolutely insidious. I think 2 points here. Number one is, please, everyone in the room, ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice for truth? it's a question journalists around the world, especially in vulnerable countries in the global south, are asking ourselves. I was forced to confront that. And the Time magazine cover actually was the first time I looked at that. They called us the guardians of truth, right? There were 4 covers around the world. The first was Jamal Khashoggi, right? Brutally murdered. It rippled through globally. The second, a murder done with impunity. The second were the journalists murdered at the Capitol Gazette in the United States. The third were the Reuters journalists who were in prison in Myanmar. And then I was the 4th. And I found out about it on Twitter, by the way. Time didn't tell me. And when I saw the tweet, I sent it to our social media team because I thought it was fake news, in quotes. And then when CNN called me for a statement, my stomach sank because I thought, is this what is required of journalists today to be a good journalist? Or what do we have to sacrifice for the truth? So this isn't something journalists can do alone. Who is to blame? I will say right off the top, we need to demand accountability from the social media platforms. Lies laced with anger and hate should not be allowed to spread faster than facts, right? But think about it. Facts are really boring. They really are. We spent our careers learning to tell stories. So this is the problem now. I mean, we live in an age where we've entered a platform. It's a behavioral modification system, right? We take our personal experiences, we put it on the platform. We're like Pavlov's dogs, voluntarily entering this, and then we're saying, connect us. But what you're actually being given is not news, not facts. And this is a problem for activists, for women's rights groups. If the integrity of what's real, if someone tells me 1,000,000 times, this table is a car, I'll believe it's a car because it was pounded. But it's a table. Reality doesn't change. And this is the challenge for all of us today.
You mentioned a moment ago this concept of sacrifice. So the government of the Philippines has investigated you. You have been arrested multiple times, facing multiple charges, including libel and tax fraud, 11 cases in all. Give us an update. What is the latest on your situation?
So in about a year, the Philippine government filed 11 cases against us. So that's almost a case a month. I posted bail 8 times in a 3-month period. And it took getting an international legal team. Amal Clooney was the one who said, do you know how many years you can go to jail? I know what I'm willing to sacrifice for the truth. I could go to jail for 63 years. Yeah, it's longer than my age right now, you know. But what do we do with this? It's what we're living with. If we believe in the standards and ethics of journalism, which I do, we came from the same roots. I think this is the time to stand up for values, for principles. This is why we became journalists in the first place. So where are the cases? All the trials are ongoing. I'm here because I posted our company has posted more than $60,000 in bail and bonds. That's more than what Imelda Marcos paid to be free, and she's been convicted in 4 different countries. I'm not going to stand down because this is the time that matters. And that's also why I ask you to think. There's something fundamentally different about this time. We've never been at this point. And, you know, I think we journalists, news groups, tend to still go on kind of habit, right? But the reality is our business model is dead or dying. In almost every country around the world, 80 to 85%, in some countries, 97% of advertising is going towards the very same platforms where we are coming under attack. Aside from that, the threats are much graver, hidden. And then the last chunk of it, of course, is that the impact on our world, on our democracies, is real. So you have to help us. We can't do this alone. Lawyers, activists, journalists have a hard time being activists. I don't have a problem right now, because when my rights were violated, it was like my handcuffs were taken off, and I'm gonna fight for my rights. How long are you gonna leave it until you fight for yours?
You have been accused, as you well know, of having an agenda.
Okay.
So I want you to address this. You've been accused of enjoying the attention that you have received in the wake of your situation and Rappler's situation. Can you address that and talk about, which you touched on there, but the animating force for you as a journalist? What is it that you think may happen if journalism goes away?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know how to respond to that, because I've been arrested. I never wanted to be arrested. How do you respond? The way I've responded, I've taken lots of anger management breathing sessions. Because I have done nothing differently from what I've been doing for more than 3 decades, which is to be a journalist, which is to demand power be held accountable to the people. Our brutal drug war, the Philippine police say about 6,000 people have been killed. 6,000, that's a lot. But human rights, our Philippine Commission on Human Rights in the UN puts that number above 27,000. The first casualty in our battle for truth is exactly how many people have been killed in this drug war, right? The second casualty is, actually the second level of impunity we're fighting is on Facebook. To watch my career whittled down and basically be helpless to fight the lies. When you feel this turned against you and then you face a prison sentence, then you learn anger management, right? But what's the mission? The mission hasn't changed. Hold power to account. It's just far more dangerous today. And the world has, again, I've said, we have to stop lies. We have to stop inciting to hate. These things have to be prevented from killing our democracies. And this isn't a free speech issue. This is, many countries in Europe know this better than the United States or the Global South. Because think about it, our countries in the Global South are far more vulnerable than yours, which have stronger institutions. In the Philippines, let me tell you how quickly democracy crumbles. 6 months. In 6 months, I watched a country that I've been covering for more than 30 years fundamentally shift. The veneer of rule of law is there. The rules, our Constitution is still there, but the actions in the real world are different. I refuse to give in. I refuse to be intimidated. I refuse to have a Damocles sword change the way I behave. I grew up as a journalist. I will continue doing my job. And part of what gives me a lot of hope are the reporters, our journalists in Rappler. We're young. We're only 7.5 years old. But our young reporters, I have one reporter, her name is Pia Renada. President Duterte they faced off and tried to intimidate her. She just held her ground and very respectfully asked him questions. Since when is power so afraid of questions?
Yes. So speaking of questions, in our final minutes here, what are the questions that you think in all sectors globally people can and should be asking themselves, asking their policymakers, asking their institutions, no matter what their background, journalist or not a journalist, if you are a private citizen watching this, what are the kinds of questions you think need to be asked?
I think the first is, don't think about My dystopian present, our dystopian present in the Philippines is your dystopian future. The Cambridge Analytica scandal, the whistleblower, Christopher Wiley, I cornered him September this year, and I asked him to tell me about the Philippines and what role it played. He said that the Philippines was the petri dish. This is where they tested tactics of mass manipulation, and if it worked, his word was, ported it over to the United States and to the West, to Europe. These tactics of mass manipulation are insidious. They are meant to undermine our democracies. They are meant to undermine your will. I've never seen this before in all the times that we've been reporters. So I go back to this, right? The world is now connected in ways that we've never been. Our independent verticals of media in each of our countries now has technology slicing right across. 2.3 billion users all around the world on one platform. A lie in my country spreads to yours like this. So what do you have to do? Before it gets worse, this is the time. It's almost like we were talking about this. After World War II, after the atom bomb exploded, the world came together to try to protect humanity from the worst of what humanity can do, right? So we had Bretton Woods, NATO, the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Now, the same thing has happened. An atom bomb has exploded, but no one knows it happened, except if you're under attack. What are we going to do? The first is, what are the values and the principles that govern tech? What does civil society, what do governments need to do to protect us, to protect our democracies? Please ask yourself, what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? That's really important now. And then think about it, then act on it. That's how we will get through this, because the world as we know it has been destroyed. We now have to actively create what the new world will look like.
Maria Ressa, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you. Thank you.